যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thanks a lot for joining the live stream in the middle of the night, continuing our discussion of whether, I hope the volume is fine, right? Yeah. Continuing our discussion of brainstorming and discussing whether the idea of Hindutva 2.0 can in fact be reconciled with libertarianism or not. And there are different degrees to libertarianism, of course. This is pretty much an anarcho-capitalist proposition, which I'm not on board with. But the author is a very, very fair thinker. He gives counter arguments to his own suggestions and even gives examples. He's not hard and fast set on one particular way of doing things. He's just saying, think about it. Maybe try it somewhere. This will probably work out. This probably won't. And since there are some of the examples that he gives, this book was written in 1973. So some of the books were written, some of the examples that he predicted or suggested actually did happen. Like, for example, Uber and stuff. That was his suggestion unknowingly. And then there are stuff that still have not been tried, and he suggests that if they are tried, they will probably lead to greater outcomes. Retrowave. No, I have not uploaded my intro song to any channel. It's not released basically. Even the arrangement is not really complete. I had to upload it hurriedly only because my Aigri Nandini versions kept getting copyright strikes. Though this one I have not released. The full song is not even arranged. The intro and stuff. I'll have to add some layers, and then only then I can go ahead with the song. So last day we discussed a chapter called For Libertarians, an expanded transcript, but the postscript, it's basically called Where I Stand. We will continue from that chapter only. And for those of you who have been following my channel, know that there's a music video I'm planning on, which will require crowd funds, because today, in the scenario that West Bengal is, crowdfunding is the only way to bypass commies in the industry. So I have made a version, my own arrangement of the Kal Bhairav Ashtakam. It will feature some Bengali rap and the entire Sanskrit stotram as well, written by Adi Shankaracharya in the 600 ADs. And it will have a rock solid story to go along with the song. And it will also portray the idea of Kal Bhairav as a weapon, his principles as a fight, as a weapon against one particular societal evil. It will show, the music video will show Kal Bhairav Ashtakam in the background of a societal evil being fought, for which I will require crowdfunding. We have finalized the locations. I just finalized the script, this entire screenplay only today. It's still not 100% final because until the rap recording is done, so far I have left 4 verses of rap, 4 verses empty for the rap to take place. The rapper is still writing the lines. I'm thinking near the end I will have to make him rap some more. So that will alter the length of the song a little bit. Based on that, the screenplay will be finalized. But so far we know where to shoot. How many days we will need to shoot again will depend on the final version of the final iteration of the screenplay. So every day right now I'm going through reiterations with the screenplay, checking out what all arrangement, minute tweaks in the mix or the arrangement can be made every day, all day. I'm practically thinking about just this song. I have not been following politics at all. And there will be Bengal martial arts involved. So we have been making countless calls to people who are involved in that stuff. So it's a Kalbhairav Ashtakam set in Bengal. Video for the story is set in Bengal. A story that shows fighting of society of a societal evil and portrays Bengal's traditions and martial arts culture. So these are the ingredients of the music video. So think about it if you can or want to donate and support an independent venture, support a non-left venture, and create a pathway for me to bypass the commies in the industry in the future as well. Yes, props and stuntmen lagle bolbo kibhabe. Will you come from England to do this? Because here though we need guild and stuff. Music video, not just music. No, music though I made long back. The song is complete. Yeah. What the fuck? I'm not going to do the editing. Our cinematographer is going to do the editing. Screenplay, story is mine. Music is mine. Mixing is mine. Stotram vocals are mine. Director is there. I will be making suggestions to him. I'm basically the producer in this situation. So I am the one doing the fundraising, and I am the one selecting who will be the best to direct this according to my resources and stuff. Who will be the best to act in this? Who will be the best cinematographer in this case? So I'm the producer here, basically. Bro, what do you do for a living? Background score composer, music arranger, music programmer, sound engineer. That's my profession. So yeah, I'm not doing the editing. That will be done by our cinematographer, but I'm not doing the direction either. But I'm telling the director what I want from a particular scene. So the screenplay so far is rock solid. Release in 4K 60 FPS. Yes. আমি কলকাতাতে থাকি এখন. My uncle's company is there. You don't need to deal with any guild or anything. Okay. Then I'll ping you on Instagram. I do need what you were talking about. Okay. Let's start the book then. In the previous chapter, I argued that simple statements of libertarian principle lead to unacceptable conclusions if you just give out one or two liners on libertarianism, and must therefore be rejected. There is no obvious logical consistency in a moral principle that implies that nobody should be permitted to breathe, but it is not a principle that many people are likely to accept. One possible response is that libertarianism is an absolute principle, an ultimate value which cannot be overridden, but that it is not adequately expressed by the simple statements I have been attacking. If those statements are only approximations to a much more complicated and subtle description of libertarian principle, it is hardly surprising that the approximation sometimes breaks down in difficult situations. This is a view with which I have a good deal of sympathy, but it is not very useful for answering real-world questions, at least until someone manages to produce an adequate statement of what libertarian principles really are. Moral philosophy is a very old enterprise, and its rate of progress has not been rapid in recent centuries, so I do not plan to hold my breath while I wait. A second response, and one with which I also have a good deal of sympathy, is that there are a number of important values in the world. They cannot be arranged in any simple hierarchy, or at least are not going to be anytime soon. Individual liberty is an important value in and of itself, not merely as a means to happiness, so we should not be willing to sacrifice large amounts of it in exchange for small amounts of happiness. But liberty is not the only value, nor is it infinitely important compared to other values, so we should not be willing to sacrifice unlimited amounts of happiness for small gains in liberty. A third possibility is that the conflict between libertarian and consequentialist values is only apparent. Perhaps there is some deep connection between the two, so that libertarian ethics, properly understood, is the set of rules that leads to the maximum of human happiness. The counterexamples given in the previous chapter must then be interpreted as some combination of mistakes about what is possible, because for some reason those situations could not arise in the real world, and mistakes about what is implied by a correct statement of libertarian principle. Something along these lines seem to be suggested by the arguments of those libertarian philosophers who claim to get their principles not by generalizing from what seems right or wrong to them, but by deducing what set of rules is appropriate to the nature of man. One argument in favor of this approach is that it fits the observation that libertarianism and utilitarianism, while quite different in principle, frequently lead to the same conclusion. Through most of this book, I have used consequentialist arguments to justify libertarian conclusions. By doing so, I provided evidence that the potential conflicts between the two approaches which I discussed in the previous chapter are the exception rather than the rule. In chapter 31, I tried to show that the institutions of anarcho-capitalism would tend to generate libertarian laws. A key step in that argument was my claim that the value to individuals of being able to run their own lives is typically greater than the value to anyone else of being able to control them. Or in other words, that increases in liberty tend to increase total utility. A fourth possibility, the last which I will consider, is that libertarianism is wrong and we should accept utilitarianism instead. According to the strict utilitarian position, rules, actions, ethics must be judged solely by their effect on the sum of human happiness. Some utilitarians would say the average of human happiness. Whatever increases happiness is good. Whatever decreases it, bad. Libertarian principles are then valued only as a means, a set of rules that frequently lead to increases in total utility and should be rejected when they do not. This again is a possible interpretation of arguments that claim to derive libertarian principles from the nature of man, although not in my experience an interpretation that those who make such arguments are willing to accept. One argument against utilitarianism is that it cannot be a correct moral rule because there is no way we can tell whether we are following it. We cannot observe other people's utility and are therefore unable to judge what will increase it. Even if we could observe individual utilities, we do not know how to compare the utility of different people, and so have no way of judging whether a gain in happiness to one person does or does not balance a loss to another. I find this argument unconvincing because the claim it is based on is too strong. Consider the act of buying a present. If you really have no knowledge at all about what makes other people happy, then buying a present is pure guesswork. You might just as well open a page of the Sears catalog at random, throw a dart at it, and buy whatever you hit. Nobody believes that. If we did, we would not buy presents. Consider a court awarding damages. If we really know nothing at all about other people's utility, how can a court decide how much someone owes me for breaking my arm? For all the judge knows, I enjoyed having my arm broken. What if? Assuming that I disliked it, he has no way of knowing whether my disutility for a broken arm is measured by a penny or $1 billion. We give presents, we award damages, and we do not believe that other people's utility is entirely unobservable. What we do believe, or at least what many of us believe, is that each of us knows more about his own values than most other people do, and that people are therefore usually better off deciding what they want for themselves. That is one of the main arguments in favor of a free society. It is a long step from that to the claim that we know nothing at all about other people's values. They are not the same thing. Even if we were entirely unable to observe other people's values, that would not necessarily prevent us from constructing a society designed to maximize total utility. Each person knows his own values. So, all of us put together know everybody's values. In order to maximize the total utility of the society, we would construct rules and institutions that utilized all of that information via some sort of decentralized decision-making system, also known as the caste system, with each person making the decisions that require the particular knowledge he has. Not entirely the caste system then, more or less. This is not, of course, merely an abstract possibility. One of the strongest arguments in favor of letting people interact freely in a market under property rights institutions is that it is the best known way to utilize the decentralized knowledge of the society, including the knowledge that each individual has about his own values. The field of welfare economics largely consists of the analysis of the rules that lead to optimal outcomes under specified circumstances, where the outcomes are evaluated in terms of the preferences of the individuals concerned. One originator of modern economics, including much of welfare economics was Alfred Marshall, an economist and utilitarian who viewed economic theory in part as a way of figuring out how to maximize total utility. Even if individual preferences can be observed, either directly or as reflected in actions, we are still left with the problem of comparing them. How can we say whether something which makes one person worse off and another better off produces a net increase in human happiness? The answer, I believe, is that we may not be able to make such comparisons very well or describe clearly how we make them, but we still do it. When you decide to give $10 worth of food and clothing to someone whose house has just burned down instead of sending a $10 check as an unsolicited gift to a random millionaire, you are expressing an opinion about which of them values the money more. When you decide where to take your children for vacation, you are making a complicated judgment about whether their total happiness will be greater camping in a forest or wading on the seashore. We cannot reduce the decision to a matter of precise calculation, but few of us doubt that the unhappiness A gets from prick of a pin is less than the unhappiness B gets from being tortured to death. Utilitarianism is a possible moral rule. The difficulties of applying it to real-world problems are substantial, but so are the difficulties of applying an alternative rule, such as minimizing coercion. One would face very similar problems in defining and measuring the amount of coercion and in judging the trade-off between increased coercion for one person and decreased coercion for another. Utilitarianism is a possible moral rule, but it is not one that I am willing to accept. Why? For the same reason that I reject all simple statements of libertarianism, because I can construct hypothetical situations in which it seems clear to me that the rule gives the wrong answer. You are the sheriff of a small town plagued by a series of particularly brutal murders. Fortunately, the murderer has left town. Unfortunately, the townspeople do not believe that the murderer has left town and will regard your assertion that he has as an attempt to justify your own incompetence in failing to catch him. कि वो एक्चुअली में भाग गया है, मगर तुम बोल रहे हो कि भाग गया है just because you don't want to go through the troubles of catching the thief. This is what the townspeople are thinking, but the guy has actually ran away from the town. Feeling is running high. If no murder is produced, 3 or 4 innocent suspects will get lynched. There is an alternative. You can manufacture evidence to frame someone. Once he has been convicted and hung, the problem will be gone. Should you do it? The age-old scapegoat of the society. On utilitarian grounds, it seems clear that the answer is yes. You are killing one innocent person but saving several, and you have no reason to believe that the one you kill values life any more than the ones you save. You yourself may receive disutility from knowing that you have framed an innocent man, but if it gets bad enough, you can always kill yourself, leaving a profit of at least one life's worth of utility. I am not willing to accept the conclusion. In an earlier hypothetical, I said that I would steal. In this one, I would not frame. To save 1 million lives, perhaps, but for a net profit of 1 or 2, no. It follows that I am not a utilitarian. Although I reject utilitarianism as the ultimate standard for what should or should not happen, I believe that utilitarian arguments or consequentialist arguments more generally are usually the best way to defend libertarian views. And what are the consequences of what Gautam Varun is pointing out here? Gautam is saying all is great until the libertarian says you don't need to wear helmet and seatbelt. Absolutely not. His actions then hampers my own rights. Okay, he is getting into positive rights territory there because there are consequences to him not wearing a helmet and not wearing a seatbelt. Because if he screws up while riding the bike or screws up driving the car and then comes under my wheels, I am screwed extra hard because now he's dead. Otherwise, he could have gotten off with a scratch. Although if you wear government-approved, ISI-marked helmets, then you are bound to die anyway. Pray to God that you only access DOT-certified American propaganda, American Western-style capitalism helmets. Otherwise, you will be fucking dead. But why should his right to have nice air go into his mouth bypass my right to not go to jail and face extra hassle because his brains got smashed under my car's wheels? Absolutely not. He doesn't have the right to not wear helmets, even in a libertarian society. Why use the word libertarianism when it's just classical liberalism with little strict rules? Now, different words have different etymologies and different source codes, so to speak. So it went through a trajectory, and there came upon a word called libertarianism. It had to do with liberty because the focus here is liberty, a free society. The focus is not whether, as a person, my political stances are liberal or not. Ram Ram, comrades. Dada, how do you retain what you read in English as it's not your mother tongue, or just reading books improves it? Yeah, reading books improves it. I studied in an English medium school. Most of the time, 99.99% of the time, I'm only consuming English content only. English podcasts, English movies, English music. So English documentaries, everything in English only. Yeah, ISI, yeah. So let's continue. I believe that utilitarian arguments or consequentialist arguments, more generally, are usually the best way to defend libertarian views. While most people do not believe that maximizing human happiness is the only thing that matters, most do believe that human happiness is important. Libertarians are not the only ones who avoid conflicts by believing that the system they favor works both morally and practically. To the extent that I can show that a particular libertarian proposal, let's say abolition of heroin laws or minimum wage laws or all government produces attractive results, I have an argument which will have some weight in convincing almost anyone to support it. So there are always good arguments on both sides. So one reason to base my arguments on consequences rather than justice, you see, this is why I have a problem with any organization, any even Hindu organization who have social harmony as one of their top priority goals, because that must come as a byproduct. Social harmony doesn't happen just because you want social harmony. You have to do other 50 things to achieve social harmony. And if you have those 50 things in your to-do list, it's fine. If you have social harmony as one of the things in the to-do list, it means you are showing off and you are virtue signaling. So one reason to base my arguments on consequences rather than justice is that people have widely varying ideas about what is just, but generally agree that making people happy and prosperous is a good thing, unless you're a Hindutva socialist. If I argue against heroin laws on the grounds that they violate the addict's rights, I will convince only other libertarians. If I argue that drug laws, by making drugs enormously more expensive, are the chief cause of drug-related crime, and that the poor quality control typical of an illegal market is the main source of drug-related deaths, I may convince even people who do not believe that drug addicts have rights. A second reason to use practical rather than ethical arguments is that I know a great deal more about what works than about what is just. This is in part a matter of specialization. I have spent more time studying economics than moral philosophy, but I do not think that that is all it is. One reason I have spent more time studying economics is that I think more is known about the consequences of institutions than about what is or is not just. That economics is a much better developed science than moral philosophy. Moral philosophy is, of course, not a developed science at all. It's hardly a science. It's just a PR campaign manager that happens after the convenience and consequences are taken into account. If so, the implications are not limited to the best choice of arguments with which to convince others. In the previous chapter, I gave a long list of equations which I saw no way of using libertarian principles to answer. In the next chapter, I will argue that they are all questions that can, at least in principle, be answered by using economic theory to discover what rules maximize human happiness. If so, then economics is not only a better way of persuading others, it is also a better way of figuring out what I myself am in favor of. And what I hate even more is moral science lectures while discussing economics, which is why I hate I hate this term called Sanatan economics. It's just a bunch of good, nice Indian Hindu behavior that's been projected as good economics. And Adam Smith is being blamed for writing a book in 1776 which destroyed American families 250 years later. That's the kind of low IQ thinking that I want to stay away from. The difference between the Paki state and Indian Babus is that Paki Babus have the decency to kill you immediately. Indian Babus will slowly tax and it. What's your take on brothels? In my opinion, the minimum age should be 21 for it. I'm for legal brothels, obviously, and 18. I'm happy with 18. Because a person can consent at 18. So if you want just the brothels to operate on the 21 years minimum age, then you are automatically saying that for those 3 years, women or men in those brothels don't have the right to consent to whatever way they will earn money or whatever way they will have sex or whatever they will use their bodies. How do I change mind of hardcore leftist friends? By debating them. Adam Smith destroyed America, but not Israel. Gautam Varun is hitting the nail at the right spot. So, the economic analysis of law, guys. We wish to know what the laws of a society, statist or anarchist, ought to be. The obvious way to find out is to start with general principles of justice and see what laws are necessary to implement them. In an earlier chapter, I argued that that cannot be done. Libertarian principles of justice cannot, at least as they now exist, answer enough of the relevant questions. They provide no way of deciding what ought to be included in property rights, how they may legitimately be defended, or how violations ought to be punished. When I say that libertarian principles cannot answer the questions, I do not merely mean that answering them is hard. That would be true wherever we started. These are hard questions. I mean that I cannot see how to even start answering these questions, what facts I need, what calculations I should do. It is as if I were faced with an engineering problem and had no way of finding out how to start setting up the relevant questions. Perhaps someone else does know how to do it, but someone else is not writing this book. My solution is to find a different starting point from which to solve the problem exactly. That starting point is utilitarianism. As a moral philosopher, I am a libertarian insofar as I am anything. As an economist, I am a utilitarian. One could describe most of this book as a utilitarian approach to libertarianism, but only by using utilitarian in a very general sense. My approach would be more accurately described as consequentialist. Remember that there are consequences. I have tried to show that libertarian institutions produce attractive results, but I have not defined attractive as anything so specific as tending to maximize the sum total of human happiness. In this chapter, however, I am trying to answer much more specific questions, not merely should we have property rights, but instead, exactly what sort of property rights should we have? To do so, I require a more precise definition of the objective I am trying to achieve. When I am finished, your conclusion, if you agree with everything I say, should not be we should have property rights XYZ, but rather in the sense that if we wanted to maximize total utility, we would want property rights XYZ. So, being more precise in the speech, not just sloganeering. That's what he's getting at. Would you like Netaji's dictatorship for 20 years or Sanatan economics? They would be one and the same. Yes, Rishabh, all that was done by Adam Smith 250 years back. Finally, a Bengali YouTuber that that I can love to watch. I believe Bengalis are the most smart person in India. Thank you. Lokavya is saying, Nirajan, you say that Bharatiya civilization can be salvaged within the confines of its geography. I assume you know that the prerequisites is temple, aka trust fund. So when will we see that happen? Under Yogi's prime ministership, probably. Netaji would at least industrialize India, I guess. Yeah, he would. Oh my God. Even if I can demonstrate that this is the best way to achieve human happiness and stuff, why should I bother? By adopting a philosophical position that I believe is false merely because it makes it easier to answer a particular set of questions, am I not making the same error as a drunk who, having lost his wallet in the middle of the block, looked for it under the street lamp at the corner because the light was better there? I think not. Even if utilitarianism is not true, it may still be useful. Yes. I like this word, useful. This is what I always want. This is what I always base my arguments on. Effectiveness, usefulness. Do this because it's useful. Don't do that because it's not useful. Not because it's good or bad or Indian or American or Hindu or Muslim. Either this is useful for you or this is not fucking useful for you. That should be the entirety of your arguments. Kon pada. Probably my mic shook. Lol. Dada, what do you think of Das Bengali people of Tripura? I know two, and they are like Bibi Kami of Kolkata. Oh, I see. I didn't know that. I don't know any Tripura people. Um, there seems to be a close correlation between rules that make people free and rules that make them happy. That is why it was the East Germans and not the West Germans who erected barbed wire fences and guard towers on their common border. Perhaps that correlation comes from some deep connection between freedom and happiness. Perhaps it is merely an accident. In any case, it is there. I conclude that by figuring out what legal rules would best make people happy, I may learn something about what legal rules are suitable for a free society. A second reason utilitarian arguments may be useful is that even if they cannot tell us what the legal rules should be, they may, under some circumstances, tell us what they will be. In chapter 31, I tried to show that the institutions of anarcho-capitalism tend to produce economically efficient law. By figuring out what legal rules would be economically efficient, we can learn something about what rules would be generated in such a society. Richard Posner, one of the leading writers on the economic analysis of law, has made the same claim for the existing body of common law. If he is right, then economic efficiency is useful for understanding what the law is, as well as what it ought to be. Economic efficiency and total happiness are, as you will shortly see, closely related. No fucking shit. Why else do people keep going to the most racist, most imperialistic country of all, US of A? Economic efficiency and total happiness are closely related. Economic efficiency is best understood as an approximate measure of total happiness. What a great line here. A third reason was suggested at the end of the previous chapter. Most people, myself included, are at least partly utilitarians. While a demonstration that a particular legal rule tends to increase the total of human happiness does not prove that the rule is a good one, it is a strong argument for it. Since I have no very good way to settle disagreements about values, it makes sense to base my argument on values that most people share. The final reason is that whether or not people care about the sum total of human happiness, most of us care a good deal about our own happiness. If a particular legal rule increases the average level of happiness there is at least a presumption that it will, on average and in the long run, make me better off. That is a reason, although not necessarily a compelling reason, why I should favor it. For all of these reasons, it makes sense to ask what legal rules tend to maximize human happiness. The rest of this chapter is devoted to trying to answer that question. My tool for doing so is the economic analysis of law. The first steps are to explain what economic efficiency means, how it can be used to choose legal rules, and why it may be a useful measure of total happiness. Consider some change that affects only two people. For each, one may ask how much the change is worth to him. How many dollars he would, if necessary, pay in order to get that positive value or prevent it? Or does it have a negative value? One could then sum the answers to get a dollar value for the effect of the change. If one person was willing to pay $4 to get the change and the other $2 to prevent it, the change could be described as increasing total value by $2. A similar calculation would be made with any number of people, summing the positive values of those who favor the change and the negative values of those opposed to it. If the net is positive, we describe the change as an economic improvement or an increase in efficiency. If negative, as an economic worsening or decrease in efficiency. If negative, then as an economic worsening or decrease in efficiency. Although we are measuring values in dollars, no money need actually be involved. The change might be the transfer of an apple from you to me. The apple is worth $2 to you and $4 to me. You would pay up $2. You would pay up to $2 to keep the apple. So the change has a value to you of minus $2. I would pay up to $4 to get the apple. So the change has a value to me of plus $4. The change produces an economic gain of $2. How would we find out whether a particular change produced a net gain or a net loss? The best way would be to observe people's values as reflected in their actions. Their actions being going to USA as soon as they can. Suppose I offer you $3 for the apple and you accept it. The fact that I make the offer implies that the apple is worth more than $3 to me. The fact that you accept implies that it is worth less than $3 to you. Assuming that we are the only people affected, the transfer must result in a net gain. Generalizing the argument, we conclude that any voluntary transaction that has no effect on third parties must result in an economic improvement. Voluntary transactions are improvements, but improvements are not necessarily voluntary transactions. Voluntary transactions are improvements, but improvements are not necessarily voluntary transactions. Suppose I am lost in the woods and starving. I stumble upon your locked cabin, break in, and use the telephone to summon help. Being both grateful and responsible, I leave you an envelope containing enough money to pay for the damage several times over. The exchange is not voluntary. You did not give me permission to break into your cabin. But just as with a voluntary transaction, we have both ended up better off, assuming my calculation of how much to leave was correct. So there was a net improvement. What's the cost of the book? I don't remember. I don't think it's going to be written anywhere. Can't find it. In both cases, selling the apple and breaking into the cabin, the cash payment provided evidence that the change was a net gain, but the gain was produced by the change, not the payment. The same $2 gain would have occurred if you had accidentally lost the apple and I had found it, although in that case it would have been the sum of a $4 gain and a $2 loss instead of the sum of two $1 gains, because you lose an apple valued at $2, get $3. I gain an apple valued at $4 and I pay $3. So far I have been talking about changes, not about rules. The next step is to ask what legal rule will result in only efficient changes, changes that produce a net economic benefit. In the case of the apple, we want a rule that will result in the apple being transferred to me if and only if it is worth more to me than to you, since only then is the transfer an economic improvement. The obvious solution is to allow the transfer if and only if both of us agree to it. If the apple is worth more to me than to you, I will make you an offer for it that you will accept. If it is not, I will not. In this case, the solution is simply property rights, enforced by a punishment for anyone who steals an apple. What about the case of the cabin? Property rights will not solve that problem, since the owner of the cabin is not available to rent out the use of his phone. This time the solution is a damage rule. If I break into the cabin and turn myself in for doing so, I owe the owner a payment equal to the amount of damage I have done to his property. If the use of his phone is not worth that price, I will keep wandering. If it is, I will break in. That is, in each case, the economically efficient outcome. If the use of his phone is not worth that price, I will keep wandering. If it is worth, then I will break in. I have now gotten far enough so that you can see how, in principle, economic analysis can be used to figure out what laws ought to be. Before I go on to discuss these two examples in more detail and to apply the analysis to some of the problems I mentioned in chapter 41, I should first fill in a missing step in the argument. I have talked about maximizing total happiness and about economic improvement, but have not shown that the two have anything to do with each other. I have not shown when or why the fact that some change is an economic improvement implies that it increases total utility. There are two important differences between the economist's criterion and the philosopher's. The first involves the measurement of utility for an individual. The second, the comparison of the utility of different people. In defining value, the economist accepts the individual's own evaluation of whether something does or does not make him better off. If I prefer gaining an apple and losing $4 to doing neither, that shows that the apple is worth at least $4 to me. That definition of value is what economists refer to as the principle of revealed preference. The possibility that I am wrong in judging my own interest, that I am willing to pay for apples even though they are bad for me, is assumed away. One implication of that assumption is that the value of heroin to a heroin addict is just as real as the value of insulin to a diabetic. If you are unwilling to accept such implications, you will conclude that an economic improvement is not inevitably an increase in total human happiness. Some of the values gained may represent mistakes by individuals about what is in their own interest. You may still agree that for most people, most of the time, revealed preference is the best available way of measuring value, and that economic efficiency is therefore a good, although not a perfect measure of total happiness. And what is the revealed preference of everyone, every Bengali commie from Kolkata? They want to go to Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore for a job, or go to UK, USA to study or for a job. That is their revealed preference. The second divergence between economic improvement and increased utility involves comparisons between people. In summing individual values in order to decide whether some changes is an improvement or a worsening, we count a $1 gain to one person as just cancelling a $1 loss to another. We act as if a dollar or what a dollar can buy were worth the we act as if a dollar or what a dollar can buy were worth the same amount of happiness to everyone. Pretty clearly this isn't true. If the rule that the economist uses for making interpersonal comparisons is wrong, why should we use it, and how can it tell us anything about what legal rules maximize total happiness? The answer to the first question is that we use the rule because my value for an apple is much easier to observe than my utility for an apple. Hence, currencies. We can observe my value for an apple by how much I am willing to pay for one, and we can, as I have just demonstrated, set up legal rules like property rights that give me the apple if and only if its value to me is greater than its value to anyone else. A system of rules that gave me the apple only if I got more utility from it than anyone else. If we talked about just utility and not the actual value, how much I'm willing to pay for it, then what would happen? Than anyone else. So hypothetically, that situation, a system of rules that gave me the apple only if I got more utility from it than anyone else would be very much harder to construct, which is what socialists, Sanatan economists will try to do. They will tell you, no, you have to eat the apple because fruits, bro. Some very nature vibes, sacralizing everything. So therefore, I am concluding that the apple is more important for you because of the imagined or presumed utility, even though you'd probably not pay for that apple with your own money. So I'll just assume, because I'm the nicer guy, I have read some Hindu text and I have a Sanskrit name for my idea. Therefore, I'm going to decide that you have utility for that apple, even though you're not willing to pay for it. So now I'm going to force everyone else to pay for your fucking apple. That's Sanatan economics for you. Yeah, it keeps the doctor away. So pay for it. Or pay for the doctor. I'm laughing at the stuff Rishabh is saying here. Which book? Book is called The Machinery of Freedom, Guide to a Radical Capitalism by David Friedman, Milton Friedman's son. And my nose is feeling very itchy. So my actions show my utility for an apple relative to my utility for some other good that I am offering to exchange for it, dollars in this case, not relative to someone else's utility for the same apple. तुम्हारे लिए अगर एप्पल बहुत जरूरी है तुम्हारे हेल्थ के लिए, तो उस वजह से मुझे आप एप्पल फोर्स मत करो, या फिर मेरे लिए फ्री में ढूंढो भी मत. मुझे खरीदना होगा, मैं खरीद लूंगा. In order to give the apple to the person who got the highest utility for it, someone would have to judge how much happier an apple made each of us. Observing other people's utility may not be impossible, but it is much harder than observing our own. It follows that it is much easier to design institutions that maximize value, that produce changes if and only if they are economic improvements, than to design institutions that maximize total utility. And this is what the guy with Sanatan economics always keeps talking about every time he tries to discuss economics. If he has a live stream of 2 hours, 1.5 hours will be about moral science. That's his economics. And the problem with moral science is not the call to morals. The problem is with the low IQ assumption that you can in fact assume everyone's morals or can affect everyone's morals. Nice, Gautam. It is easier to figure out what increases value than what increases utility, but is the answer of any use? Am I not again searching where the light is best instead of where I dropped my wallet? I think not. In many situations, although not in all, the fact that a change is an economic improvement increases total value is strong evidence that it also increases total utility. Since changes in economic value are much easier to measure than changes in utility, we may use the former as a proxy for the latter. Consider, for example, the abolition of a tariff on US imports. Suppose we could show, as in many cases we can, that in addition to benefiting our trading partners abroad, it is an economic improvement for residents of the US that the gains to Americans who are better off as a result of abolishing the tariff, workers and stockholders in US export industries, and American consumers of imported goods or goods that compete with imports, measured in dollars, is greater than the loss to those who are worse off, the workers and stockholders in industries that compete with imports. Individual gainers and losers may have greatly varying values for a dollar. A change that benefits one of them by $6 and hurts another by 5 is not necessarily an improvement in total utility. But both gainers and losers are large and diverse groups that there is no obvious reason to expect the one group on average to value dollars more or less than the other. If the average is about the same for both groups, then a change that produces a gain in value probably produces a gain in utility as well. That was the argument used by Alfred Marshall, who invented the idea of economic improvement to justify using it as an approximate way of identifying changes that increase total utility. The approximation should be a good one as long as we are considering situations where there is no reason to expect gainers and losers to have different utilities for a dollar on average, different relations between value measured in dollars and measured in some absolute units of happiness. In many cases, that is a reasonable assumption. Buyers and sellers of apples, lost hunters and owners of locked cabins in the woods are likely to be similar people, even the same people at different times. There is one obvious exception. We expect as a general rule that the more money you have, the less an additional dollar is worth to you, and therefore that on average, a dollar represents more happiness to someone with very little money than to someone with a lot of money. That is why we rarely give charity to millionaires. We therefore expect that if gainers and losers have very different incomes, the net change in value will be a poor measure of the net change in happiness, although not entirely. If let's say today you had in fact $10,000 lying around, you would be probably better off, broadly speaking, contributing more to society if you gave that $10,000 to an Ambani instead of a beggar, because that beggar has no clue how to use it best. He has no financial literacy. At best, he'll save it or spend it immediately because they are that dumb. Because usually when you are that low IQ, like it's below 80 and stuff, then you can't be functional at any job. So instead, if that 10,000 rupees lands up in the hands of Ambani, he's going to reinvest it in his business, and more people are going to get employment and even nice charity. So you would be actually creating more value for society if you donated more to millionaires than to poor people. Barbaric is saying the issue with most utilitarian standpoints is it does a bad job of segregating the time frame of maximizing value. In a day, gym is useless. Longer term, considerable value. So what? Yeah, that is utility. Delayed gratification is gratification. Gratification is utility. If you are just too stupid to consider only the short-term gain as utility, that's that idiot utilitarian's fault, not the fault of utilitarianism. Because after all, it's utility we are talking about. ভাই তোমার গিটারটা কি? আমার তো তিনটে গিটার এখানে, একটা আমার না অবশ্য, একটা শায়ক পালের। Changes that increase total utility. The approximation, yeah, this we discussed. Yeah, a change that makes a rich man $10 worse off and a poor man $9 better off is an economic worsening, but it may well increase the amount of happiness in the world. The same is true for a change that harms a large group of rich people by a total of $10 million and benefits a large group of poor people by a total of 9 million. The obvious conclusion, and one that many utilitarians have drawn, is that income redistribution is a good thing. Taxing the rich and giving the money to the poor may be an economic worsening due to collection costs and disincentives, and yet a utilitarian improvement, because we are talking about the short-term gain here again, the short-term utility, not the real utility. My reasons for disagreeing with that conclusion are two. The first is that since the poor are, as a rule, politically weak, they are at least as likely to be victims of governmental income transfers as they are to be the beneficiaries. This is the point that I made in chapter 4. This was a brilliant chapter. The second is that the struggle among groups trying to make themselves, because what people forget, socialists especially forget, that governments are all the time doing income redistributions from taking from the poor and giving it to the rich. For example, the lockdowns. Who did it benefit? The shopkeeper on your street corner, not Amazon, Jeff Bezos. $15 minimum wage. Who does it benefit? Again, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, because they can afford it. Every other shop owner in the entire country of USA, they cannot afford it. They go out of business. Or let's say stuff like Lockheed Bhandar and stuff. It's coming out of the taxes of us, which we are not availing really. We don't need Lockheed Bhandar, all of us. But the person who needs Lockheed Bhandar is actually paid into it through a bunch of stuff, tola, etc., real taxes, everything. And he is poorer as a result of that. His own relatives, his own son, his own probably, her own probably husband does the tolabaji, because of which investments can't come in, and therefore they need the free handout. If a thought process can't be idiot proofed, it either becomes a niche or an ideology. Yeah. And you should read The Law by Bastiat. It's small and the sarcasm is good. But this needs to be called out on, because unless you actively study economics, this understanding isn't obvious to a lot of people, unfortunately. Epic collection. Dada. Thank you, Bangaputro. Which thought process is idiot proof? Barbara Smithy. The only thought process that can be idiot proof, that can't be used as a weapon by a fool or an evil man, is a thought that doesn't stand for anything, that doesn't mean anything. It's so malleable that it's useless even as a weapon for the fool or the idiot. You just survive. You're a cockroach. Your only credit is surviving. Yes, hence we need ideologies. Ideologies that also must look after the utility of the group, which we discussed last day in that live stream of pick a side. Without pick a side, it can't happen. And then your side has to survive, for which you need internal systems of criticism. Do you agree with any person or idea that 100%? I don't think so. Vivek, probably. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that I disagree with Vivek on. Probably Vivek only. Yeah, I disagree with Vivek on one or two small things, which I don't really know how serious to take, because they might be just political sloganeering, that America was absolutely, quote unquote, absolutely founded on Judeo-Christian values. No, it was not. It was absolutely founded on only Protestant values. Then he keeps saying this as a political slogan. What else? He says that the founders, when they meant that there should be complete freedom for anyone who comes to India on religion and stuff, or anyone who comes to USA for the practice of their religion and stuff, actually meant all of the religions of the world, which might not be the case. Some of the founders, at least, definitely meant the different sects inside Christianity. The Secret of Success, Joseph Henrich. I don't know how to pronounce it. So yes, an idea that stands for something, an idea, the thought process, it will end up being idiot-proof only if it is too malleable. So either you live like a cockroach or you die fighting like a lion. Wasn't America founded on classical liberalism thought? That got called or named classical liberalism later on. Classical liberalism used to be a lot of things, but at that point in history, Protestantism was also what America was trying to do. If it was completely classical liberalism, there would not be like gun rights and ending of slavery, freedom of speech. All that would not come in later on. There would not be any amendments required in the US Constitution. अमेंडमेंट्स रिक्वायर हुआ ही भी क्योंकि गलती था. अगर क्लासिकल लिबरलिज्म था ही तो गलती कैसे हुआ? Basically, in utilitarian terms, you'll need the smart ones to push the ideology that going to the gym is good to idiots, so that there is greater utilitarian value to the group. Yes. Even the idiots can in fact find out later on. Yeah. So where were we? Taxing the rich and giving the money to the poor may be an economic worsening due to collection costs, disincentives, and yet a utilitarian improvement. My reasons for disagreeing with that conclusion are two. The first is that since the poor are, as a rule, politically weak, they are at least as likely to be the victims of governmental income transfers as they are to be the beneficiaries. The second is that the struggle among groups trying to make themselves beneficiaries rather than victims is likely to be an expensive one, making practically all of us, rich and poor, worse off in a society that permits such redistribution than in one that does not. That is that point that I made in chapter 38. Those two chapters were a utilitarian attack on one of the chief doctrines that divides utilitarians from libertarians, the income redistribution thing. Thoughts on types of taxes, please. That's too broad a statement, Alapan Podia. If you can ask something more specific, then I can answer. But by the way, a thought came to my mind regarding what you asked previously, that how to debate commies and change their mind, etc. There are two rules of thumb that you must keep in mind while debating commies. One is, debates are the WWE of intellectuals. Debates are not an endeavor where you actually change the mind of your opponent, especially if it's happening with someone who is not that good of a friend of yours. Okay, if it's an absolutely properly truly close friend with whom you know, you are absolutely sure you are having an honest conversation, he's an honest actor in that conversation, only then can you expect or do it just because you want to convince the other person. Otherwise, never debate a commie unless you are surrounded by people. You have to make a spectacle out of it. You have to make a fool out of that person, that commie, and convince the people in the crowd of the value of your arguments, not the commie itself, that commie himself or herself. And secondly, always check the premise first. If they say that, let's say, this pen is bad, first ask yourself, is this even a pen? Okay, because that's how their arguments usually start. Their arguments are skyscrapers built on a heap of horseshit premises. So always check their premises first. Feminism sounds so benign, but what is the other side? Have a live streamer. Yeah, interesting idea. Maybe they gave namesake tribute to Protestantism, but in my opinion, America founded on classical liberalism thought, because the concept of gun rights or self-defense comes from John Locke. So what? Before John Locke, nobody defended themselves or what? अगर करना है तो करना है, कर ही लेंगे. जॉन लॉक का जो जस्टिफिकेशन देंगे बाद में, वही है वो पीआर कैंपेन. They are close friends. Yeah. Then just debating calmly, smiling, not getting angry and aggressive at all. Those things will come in help. Purely on pagan values. When was philosophy or logic part of any Abrahamic ideology? America founded purely on, where did they get those pagan values? From Thomas Jefferson's Bible. What was the source of their pagan values? Or the Native Americans, you mean? Yeah, what Rishabh is saying here, that can be one point. Yeah, but that's thrice removed from the key issue we are discussing. Some pages back, I abandoned the subject of specific rules in order to show the connection between economic improvement and increases in total happiness, to show why designing rules to maximize economic efficiency makes sense as a way of increasing human happiness. I have now done so. I have not shown that economic improvement and increases in total utility are the same. They are not. I have shown why the former is an approximate measure of the latter and may, for the practical purposes, be the best measure available. Readers who are not convinced may want to look at Marshall's original argument or at the more detailed discussion of economic efficiency in one or another of my other books. Excuse me. The former listed in Appendix 2, the latter in Appendix 1. We will get to them someday. Readers who are economics students should be warned that those are almost the only places to look. Modern economics texts, other than mine, use a different, although for most purposes equivalent, definition of improvement. It is now time to go back to discussing specific rules. The question I shall be investigating is how one would design legal rules to maximize economic efficiency, to permit changes that are economic improvements and prevent changes that are economic worsenings. Consider again the solution to the apple problem. If we do not enforce property rights in apples, at least two kinds of inefficient change may occur. First, apples may be transferred from owners who value them more to thieves who value them less. Second, thieves may spend time and money stealing apples instead of buying them. This is what happens when property rights don't exist. Suppose the apple is worth $2 to you and $4 to me. Instead of buying it for $3, I sneak into your orchard at night and steal it at a cost of $1 worth of time and effort. You are worse off by $2, the value of the apple to you, and I am better off by $3, the value of the apple to me minus the cost of me getting it. So there is a net gain of $1. My stealing the apple is an economic improvement over my not getting it at all, but not getting the apple is not the only alternative. I could have bought it instead. Stealing the apple is worse than buying the apple, since that would have produced a net gain of $2. So you see, many of my well-meaning, well-wisher viewers keep saying that a lot of your ideas, I hope they come true, but they can come true only when India reaches a $10,000 GDP per capita and stuff. So, or when India reaches $10,000 GDP per capita, will we be able to do this and that, etc. Or when we become a $10 trillion economy and stuff, can we do libertarianism then? I have told them that if India manages that without libertarianism, it will be a miracle, and then we won't need anything called libertarianism in the first place. Because until libertarianism happens, we are going to keep doing these economically worse off decisions. Because stealing, what we're talking about, is the same as income redistribution, taxes, freebies. All of that is stealing. All of that is bad economics decisions, bad economics policy over the years, repeatedly. Now we are even going to fuck meritocracy in the ass by doing reservations in the private sector. और इन ये सब आर्ग्यूमेंट का काउंटर क्या है कि तो जाओ कांग्रेस का वोट दो तो लवड़े अगर कांग्रेस का एक सैफरन वर्जन ही देना है who has some better views on stronger on पाकिस्तान और बाकी सब में हम चुप रह जाएं, बेटर ऑन पाकिस्तान है भाई, बाकी सब छोड़ दो, फीजिबल नहीं है, तो ऐसा गांडू चुतियापा आर्ग्यूमेंट अगर करना है तो लवड़े भूल जाओ $10 trillion इकोनॉमी. And especially with the kind of inflation that we have, inflation might go down because of the weakening of the dollar, but if inflation goes on, by the time you reach $10 trillion GDP or what the fuck GDP per capita, it will be equivalent to 1 rupee. Don't you think Chinese are basically authoritarians? Yes, of course. That is why I don't take any policy of China seriously in while comparing them to India. That if China could do, why can't we, etc. लड़ा डिक्टेटर है, एक दिन सुबह उठ के लगा कि नहीं एक से ज्यादा हम बच्चे नहीं जन्म देने देंगे, तो हो गया, गायब हो गया सब. एक दिन उनको लगा कि नहीं बढ़िया से डेवलपमेंट वगैरह करते हैं, तो हो गया डेवलपमेंट. तो वो चुतिया हमारे यहाँ तो है नहीं, वो तो चाइना का एग्जांपल हमको देके क्या होगा. Okay, let's continue. Stealing the apple is worse than buying the apple, since that would have produced a net gain of $2. An efficient legal system will include some way of making it in the interest of people who want apples to buy them instead of stealing them. That is why we punish thieves. How much should we punish them? If all thieves were caught, a fine equal to the value of what is stolen would be sufficient. Since stealing things is more trouble than buying them, theft would be the less attractive of the two alternatives. If only a fraction of thieves are caught, say 1 in 10, the same argument suggests that the punishment should be scaled up accordingly. If the fine for stealing an apple is 10 times the price of buying one, then stealing costs the thief on average as much money as buying and more trouble. We now have the same rule for apples and for cabins. The rule I suggested for someone who broke into a cabin was that he should pay a fine equal to the damage done, provided he turned himself in. I included that condition in order to make it a case where the probability of being caught did exist. That probability to exist करना चाहिए पहली बात. In order to eliminate inefficient transactions, the amount of the fine or the probability times the amount, if only a fraction of thieves are caught, must be at least the value of what is taken. The case of the cabin in the woods is an argument against making the fine any higher than that. While we could have one legal rule for apples and a different one for cabins, it may be easier to have a single set of rules defining what property rights are and what happens if you violate them. Such a set of rules should take account of the possibility that some violations of property rights, such as the lost hunter breaking into the cabin, are desirable changes that for some reason cannot be arranged via voluntary change. A punishment lower than the damage done permits some inefficient changes. A punishment higher than the damage done prevents some efficient ones. So the ideal punishment equals the damage done, appropriately adjusted for the probability of catching and convicting the criminal. A more precise analysis would qualify this conclusion in many ways to take account of complications such as the cost of enforcing law. Preventing inefficient crimes may sometimes cost more than it is worth, and the possibility, preventing inefficient crimes may sometimes cost more than it is worth, and the possibility and the possibility of error in determining guilt. Readers interested in such an analysis will find it in my book called Law's Order. গুরু পাপে লঘুদণ্ড হবে না, আবার লঘু পাপে গুরুদণ্ড হবে না। A punishment lower than the damage done permits some inefficient changes. A punishment higher than the damage done prevents some efficient changes. So far, I have treated the probability of catching a thief as if it were simply a fact of nature. It is not. By hiring more policemen or offering higher rewards, we can increase the probability that thieves will be caught. In setting up a system of legal rules, one of the decisions to be made is whether to catch half the thieves and fine each of them twice what he stole, catch a tenth of the thieves and fine each 10 times what he stole, or catch one thief in 1,000 and shoot him. In choosing the proper combination of punishment and probability, we are trading off two kinds of costs. Remember, guys, like our Lord and Savior Thomas Sowell says, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Enforcement cost is the cost of catching criminals, paying policemen, distributing pictures of wanted criminals or whatever. Two kinds of costs. Punishment cost is the cost of punishing criminals once we have caught them, as we move from a combination of high probability and small punishment to a combination of low probability and large punishment. Enforcement costs decline since we only have to catch one criminal in 100 instead of 1 in 2. Punishment costs, however, tend to rise with the size of the punishment. So we maximize total value by choosing the combination of probability and punishment that produces the appropriate level of deterrence. Probability times punishment equal to damage done by the crime at the lowest cost. Okay, remember this formula. Probability times punishment, probability into punishment equals to damage done by the crime at the lowest cost. Om Soelaya Nama. Yes. So, Dada, is California not persecuting thefts under $1,000 an example of this idea? That is not the case, Rishabh, because they are not doing the relevant or the extension of these laws that were supposed to happen in the funding of the police officers. It's not like they're doing some efficient funding structures or better funding structures for law and order. So there's just pure racism, pure soft bigotry of low expectations. What is punishment cost and why does it increase with the size of the punishment? Consider first a fine. The cost to the criminal is the amount of money he has to pay. Having to pay a $10 fine makes me worse off by exactly $10. That cost is balanced, however, by the benefit to whoever receives the fine. The victim under a system of civil law, where the fine is called a damage payment, or the state under a system of criminal law. The net cost of the fine is only the administrative expense of collecting it. As the size of the punishment becomes larger, it becomes less likely that the criminal can pay it as a fine and more likely that it must take some other form, such as imprisonment or execution. Imprisonment and execution serve at least as well as fines to discourage people from violating other people's property rights, but the cost to the criminal is no longer a benefit to someone else. When the criminal loses his life, nobody else gets an extra life in exchange. When you are imprisoned, nobody gets the freedom you lose, and someone must pay the additional cost of maintaining the prison. The recognition that punishment is costly provides part of the answer to another problem mentioned in chapter 41. How sure we have to be that someone is guilty before convicting them. Punishing the innocent results in the same sorts of costs as punishing the guilty without providing the benefit of deterrence. In designing the optimal system of legal rules, we must balance the punishment costs of convicting innocent defendants against the costs of a higher standard of proof, which is hiring more policemen and acquitting more guilty defendants. One conclusion is that we will want a higher standard of proof for an offense that results in a costly punishment, such as execution, than for an offense that results in an inexpensive punishment, such as a fine. That is, in fact, the way our present legal system works. A higher standard of proof is required in criminal cases, that is beyond a reasonable doubt, than in civil cases, where the preponderance of the evidence takes the front seat. This is not simply a matter of taking more care in more important cases. $1 million damage payment is a bigger punishment than a 2-week jail sentence, but the standard of proof required to impose it is lower. We have now seen, at least in a general way, how and why property rights should be enforced. There is one feature of the analysis that I find interesting and some readers may find shocking. In calculating the costs and benefits, whose sum we try to maximize, costs and benefits to the thief have the same weight as the costs and benefits to the victim. In judging whether a change was inefficient and should therefore be prevented, gains to the criminal were balanced against costs to the victim. In choosing a combination of probability and punishment, we included the cost of the punishment to the criminal along with costs of enforcement and costs paid or benefits received by the court system in the total to be minimized. What is interesting about this is that we are deriving libertarian results rather than assuming them. We are deriving them, we are reaching them, we are stumbling upon them, which is the best way to think. We start with an assumption, utilitarianism, that says nothing at all about the relative virtue of the thieves and victims. We end with a legal system in which thieves are punished. Before leaving the question of enforcing property rights and going on to discuss how those rights should be determined, there are a few more things worth noting. As I pointed out in the previous chapter, there are two ways of measuring utility. One is from the outside, by trying to estimate how much someone else values something. I argued that doing so is not impossible, but that it is difficult to do it very well. The other is from the inside. Each of us knows quite a lot about what he values, and his actions reflect that knowledge. The legal rules I have suggested use both methods, which is why veganism is awesome, because it tests you directly. It reveals your preferences immediately. जिसको जितना डायलॉग मारना है ह्यूमन राइट्स पे, फेमिनिज्म पे, पैलेस्टाइन पे, गाजा पे, यूक्रेन पे, everything goes to fucking hell the moment your individual responsibility or courage or Sayyam, control is in question. And the only way to test that in day-to-day life directly is veganism, which is not very popular. There are, 2,000 vegans in the entire country. Inheritance tax versus income tax versus consumption tax. Only consumption tax to some degree. No inheritance tax and no income tax. Oh, Gautam Varun, you have not heard this term? It's a very famous term. It was, I think, coined by George Bush's speechwriter in a press conference. Soft bigotry of low expectations. कि bigotry, hard bigotry भी हो सकता है, soft bigotry भी हो सकता है. तो hard bigotry जो कि racism के जैसा होता है, वहां पे क्या हो रहा है कि मैं डायरेक्टली तुमको आके बोल रहा हूँ कि तुम ऐसे हो, ये तुम्हारा रंग है तुम्हारे स्किन का, या फिर ये तुम्हारा लैंग्वेज है या रिलीजन है, और इसलिए तुम भोसरी वाले हो. दैट्स हार्ड बिगट्री. सॉफ्ट बिगट्री ऐसा है कि मैं दिखाना नहीं चाहता हूं कि एक्चुअली मैं बिगटेड हूं तुम्हारी तरफ, मगर मैं ऐसे काम करूंगा जिससे कि निकल आएगा कि एक्चुअली मैं बिगटेड हूं तुम्हारी तरफ. तो तुमसे ना हो पाएगा, ये डेमोक्रेसी तुमसे नहीं होगा, तो चलो तुम्हारे पार्लियामेंट को उड़ा देते हैं, या फिर तुम्हारे ऊपर हम आके डेमोक्रेसी बिठा देते हैं, लेकिन तुमसे नहीं हो पाएगा. दैट्स सॉफ्ट बिगट्री ऑफ लो एक्सपेक्टेशंस. आई एक्सपेक्ट so lowly of you. I expect such base, petty things from you, and therefore do not pressurize you to do too well in life. That actually ends up proving my bigotry against you, which is exactly what is going on against black people in America. कि तुम लवड़े चोरी डकैती तो कर ही लोगे, यही तो तुम्हारा नेचर है, तो इसलिए जेल जाना भेजना ही बंद कर देते हैं तुम लोगों को. That's soft bigotry of low expectations. By the way, why is Gada always constantly running out of all things other than how did the people who don't have food, 2 वक्त का खाना नहीं है मगर AK-47 मिल जाता है when they are Maoists? Soft bigotry of low expectations, basically BB communism, yes. Can corruption be eradicated with current political system? Absolutely not. Should there be tax on holding property even after paying tax while buying? Absolutely not. Okay, let's continue. The legal rules I have suggested use both methods. The both methods being एक है outsider's view, trying to estimate how much someone else values something, and the insider's view, knowing how much I value a particular thing as shown by my actions. The legal rules I have suggested use both methods. Apples are allocated by revealed preference. If I think the apple is worth more to me than you think it is worth to you, I buy it from you. Locked cabins in the woods are allocated by a combination of revealed preference and outside observation. The hunter decides whether to break in according to how much he values access to a telephone. But the court decides the damages he must pay according to how much the court thinks that the owner values not having his door broken down. This is a point I made earlier when I suggested that the existence of courts making damage awards is evidence that we believe it is possible to know something about other people's values. If revealed preference is a better way of measuring values, why not construct a legal system that depends entirely on revealed preference and never tries to measure someone else's value for something, भाई? प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि अगर रिवील्ड प्रेफरेंस से हम पॉलिसी लॉफेयर सब कुछ चलाने लगे तो हम भाषणबाजी कैसे करेंगे? हाँ, सोशलिज्म को या फिर कैपिटलिज्म को गाली देके तब हम दिल्ली, बॉम्बे, बेंगलुरु, यूएसए कैसे जाएंगे? वेस्टर्न स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म खराब है बोल के हम यूएसए में टॉक्स देने कैसे जाएंगे भोसड़ी के? इसीलिए मदर चोदों को चाहिए समथिंग दैट्स far away from revealed preferences. हमको रिवील नहीं करना है हमारा intentions क्योंकि हम भोसड़ी वाले हैं. But if political systems actually ran on revealed preferences, we would all be better off. Is that green tea good? Yeah, it's pretty nice. Rishabh is saying it's the same logic as some lefty saying, अरे क्यों यात्रा करते हो? वो लोग तो पत्थर मारेंगे ही. Yeah, like word for word, my commie friends have told me, don't antagonize them. The answer is suggested by the example of the cabin in the woods. Since the owner is not present when the lost hunter shows up, there is no way to negotiate a price for the use of the owner's telephone. Are there ways to solve this problem without having a court measure value? Perhaps the owner might decide for himself how much he objected to people breaking into his cabin and post a price list on the door, like $50 for breaking the lock, and another 10 for using the phone. The problem is that there are many different situations in which one person might very much want to use someone else's property and not have an opportunity to get his permission first. The price list would have to be a long one, and it might be necessary to post it not only on the door but on every tree. It would have to cover not only breaking down the door to use the telephone but also trespassing onto the property while running away from a bear. Cutting dead wood to make a fire to keep him from freezing, and perhaps even bulldozing down the cabin to stop the spread of a forest fire. All things considered, using a court to estimate damages seems a more practical solution. Another alternative would be to arrange a contract in advance between the hunter and the property owner, defining the circumstances and conditions under which the former could use the latter's property. Here again, there are practical difficulties due to the variety of possible problems and the large number of people involved. Each individual hunter has a very low probability of being lost and having to break into a cabin, and an even lower probability of having to break into any particular cabin. Negotiating terms in advance for an event that has only one chance in 10 million of happening is unlikely to be worth the trouble. If we try to draw advance contracts covering every possible contingency, we shall have no time to do anything else. Here, what I'm reminded of is Alapon Podia's comment again, that can corruption be eradicated with current political system? Now, this is where I actually disagree with Sanjeev Sanyal. He is very big on, in fact, all of them, Abhijit Mitra, Kuchal Mehra, they are all very big on police reforms, hiring more people. Our citizen to police ratio is abysmal, etc. My question is, how does hiring more police officers change the absolute fucking assholey behavior of 99% of police officers in the country? Right now, police are assholes. They are gundas. They do hafta vasuli. They act as goons of the political parties in power in the locality. Okay, there are 10 police officers who do that, let's say, among the 12 total police officers in the area. Now, if you just hire double of that, now there are 24 total police officers, and 22 of them are still goons of the political party, still charge hafta with more firepower, and do all the other shenanigans as well. Police work overtime, and that's why they become mostly dumb. We're not talking about whether they are intelligent or not. We are talking about whether they are assholes or not, and that's not because of overtime. That's just behavior. Unless you guarantee me that 100% of police officers are corrupt. If that is the case, that would tell me that yes, their salaries are in fact too low, and their work time is in fact too big, in fact too high. Therefore, all of them are just ending up doing illegal things, because it's evident that there's too much pressure on them, because every policeman does that. But since every policeman doesn't do that, I don't see how hiring more police officers makes them less of an asshole. Change police laws in India, give better training, almost like retroactive, even that won't work. See, here's a way to look at this problem where you won't fall into these traps and pitfalls. Okay, everything you are recommending that the police do, first imagine, will it be better or worse if there are just more police officers involved? Okay, or if their behavior in the end doesn't change. So let's say an asshole police officer who does hafta vasuli and is the stooge of a political party. What happens when that person gets better training, army-like training? What happens when the number of such police officers with better training and better army-like training is higher in number, and they're stooges of a political party and they do hafta vasuli? How? The last line of your statement says that we have to make sure that they can't become goons on behalf of politicians and protect them. The only way to do that, which is why I responded to Alapon Puria that it's not possible in this current scenario, in this current situation, because political parties, gundas, politicians, elected or non-elected, have so much power amassed in their hands that they can use the police to their wills. And how have they amassed so much power? Because of the kitty bag, the stack of freebies they sit on. Take away the freebies, politicians lose their power. They can't wield it anywhere anymore. What will be the repercussions of caste census? I think the dominant ones in every place will be sad and stuff. Why is the army so good but the police so shit? Is it just the opportunity to fuck with people that the police have but army don't? That's a very, very difficult question to answer, and we will absolutely have to get to becoming a Indian military historian pretty much to answer that question. But off the top of my head, police are handling, or we are interacting with the police each and every fucking day, while the army is shooting one Bangladeshi there. The kuch saal baad ek yudh hua. So since they are not doing something or the other every day, interacting with their potential enemies all the time, therefore we are not seeing their competence every day all the time. Plus there's a since it's one entity with one set of do's and don'ts, since one way of doing things and stuff, which has not really been challenged. We don't really know whether a different Indian army in a different iteration with different sets of rules would be better off or not than this Indian army. So we're talking about an unfalsifiable claim, really. Body cams might give an answer. Don't let the officers turn them off. Gautam Varun, the moment you give body cams to a police officer in India, at least in Bengal, they will shut it down the moment they want to beat you up, and then they'll go to the local Trinamool MLA or councillor and say that, Dada, I forgot to turn my body cam on, and he'll say, yeah, no problem. I'll make sure something doesn't happen. Nothing happens to you. Or did you hear about what the tribals in Tripura do to the wannabe illegals from? No, I have not heard. So in a sense, retroactive then, no betterment of anything of any fucking police officer, no salary, no training, no numbers, unless you decrease the powers of their grandfathers who are the politicians. अगर फ्रीबी देते रहोगे तो पुलिस को जितना चाहे तुम पैसों से नहा दो, ट्रेनिंग से नहा दो, वो भोसरी वाले ही रहेंगे, वो मादरचोद ही रहेंगे. What these examples suggest is that it is not practical to set up a legal system in which outcomes are entirely determined by revealed preference and voluntary transactions. Voluntary, reveal, क्या सब word है ये सब सनातन इकोनॉमिक्स में थोड़ी है. हमको तो दिखाना है कि 1776 में कैसे एक बुक में एडम स्मिथ ने डिवोर्स के बारे में चर्चा किया था, बोला था डिवोर्स कितना बढ़िया है. What these examples suggest is that it is not practical to set up a legal system in which outcomes are entirely determined by revealed preference and voluntary transactions. At the same time, because the market provides a less expensive and more accurate way of measuring values, we would like a system that uses courts only when markets are not a viable alternative. If, for example, there is some class of cases where we are sure that market transactions are always practical and the efficient level of crime is therefore zero, we might make the punishment much more than the court's estimate of damage done, that is punitive damages, in order to make it less likely that mistakes by the court system will encourage inefficient crimes. A full discussion of such issues would again carry us beyond what can be done in a chapter. I have now finished sketching the answer to one of the problems raised in an earlier chapter, the appropriate punishment for a thief. In doing so, I have laid the groundwork for answering two other questions raised in that chapter, the proper restrictions on risky activity and the proper definition of property rights. The case of risky activity, as exemplified by the pilot with a small chance of crashing anywhere within 1,000 miles of his starting point, is similar to the case of the starving hunter. The pilot, unlike the hunter, does not actually, the pilot we had discussed, remember, a few chapters back, कि अगर उसके पर्सनल लिबर्टी के चक्कर में वो प्लेन उड़ाते रहे और गिराए तुम्हारे खेत में जाके तुम्हारे घर के ऊपर, तब क्या होगा? The pilot, unlike the hunter, does not actually decide to break into someone's house. He does decide how often to fly, how often to have his plane checked, and what kind of safety equipment to buy. By making those decisions, he controls the probability that he will end up entering someone's house through the roof, which is why people refusing to wear helmets cannot be called libertarians. Similarly, someone who drives a car or uses dynamite to remove stumps from his land does not choose to have an accident that results in injury to someone else's person or property. He does, however, choose how much to drive or blast and how carefully. In each case, the proper legal rule is one that forces him to pay for any damage produced by his actions. Under such a rule, he will take an action if and only if its value to him is great enough to make up for the probabilistic damage he causes. Why is my Josh crooked? So autocracy? No, libertarianism. Decreasing the powers of the politicians by decreasing the freebies. Do you think permanent employment should exist in civil society apart from army? No. Permanent employment shouldn't exist even for army. I'm suggesting that there should not be any option to turn off body cams by the officers themselves. अरे गलती हो गई मालिक, माफ कर दीजिए. It should be monitored by other third parties. Who the fuck is the third party? वो third party का salary कौन देगा? We should not be associated with state-led government. Now you are in the trap of the जन लोकपाल bill. ठीक है? नहीं होगा वैसे. सब कोई तो वो थर्ड पार्टी ठीक से काम कर रहा है कि नहीं, उसके लिए एक फोर्थ पार्टी को हायर करना पड़ेगा. वो फोर्थ पार्टी काम ठीक से कर रहा है कि नहीं, उसके लिए फिफ्थ पार्टी हायर करना पड़ेगा. तो अल्टीमेटली बात आती है इंसेंटिव्स और डिसइंसेंटिव्स में ही अल्टीमेटली. नहीं तो हायर करते रहोगे लोगों को. Under such a rule, he will take an action. In each case, the proper legal rule is one that forces him to pay for any damage produced by his actions. Under such a rule, he will take an action if and only if its value to him is great enough to make up for the probabilistic damage he causes. A full discussion of the complications associated with problems of risk would again take us far beyond the constraints of even a very long chapter. One of the points we would have to deal with is the possibility that someone whose airplane destroys my house may not have enough money to pay for the damage, even assuming he is alive to do so. If so, we might want legal rules that allow potential victims to forbid my taking off unless I can show that I have suitable insurance. A second point is that accidents are frequently a product of decisions made by both parties concerned. Your car would not have collided with my bicycle if I had not been riding in dark clothes at night, but my carelessness would have produced only a close call if your brakes had been functioning correctly. This makes it harder to design efficient rules to control accidents. If I know that you will be liable for all the costs of the accident, I have no incentive to take precautions. If you know I will be liable, you have no incentive. क्या बात है? I have no incentive. Listen to this. If I know that you will be liable for all the costs of the accident, I have no incentive to take precautions. If you know I will be liable, you have no incentive. If the liability is divided between us, both of us have an inefficiently low incentive. The final question to be dealt with is how property rights should be defined. The question implicit in my discussion of trespass by single photons and single molecules of carbon dioxide. We start by noting that we call a property right the ownership of a piece of land, for instance, is actually what we call a property right is actually a complicated bundle of such rights. Under current American law, it includes the right to forbid trespass, but not, under most circumstances, the right to shoot trespassers or to plant landmines where you expect them to step. It does not include the right to forbid overflights by airplanes, nor trespass by small numbers of carbon dioxide molecules or photons. The questions I raised in chapter 41 are questions about what belongs in that bundle of rights. Okay. It seems at first that the answer is obvious. When I acquire land, I acquire all of the rights associated with it. The problem is that some rights are associated with more than one piece of land. The right to decide whether a light beam crosses the border from your land to mine is associated with both my property and yours. It is useful to me because if I control the right, I can keep you from firing laser beams at my front door. I can even keep you from shining a flashlight at my darkroom window. It is useful to you because if you do not own that right, you cannot do anything on your property that can be seen from my property. In this particular case, there is an obvious common sense solution. You have the right to make any light whose intensity can be seen but not felt. The line is drawn somewhere between the brightest light likely to be produced by your normal activities and the weakest likely to do damage to my property. Unless your normal activities include outdoor testing of high-powered lasers or nuclear weapons, there should be no problem finding a suitable dividing line. The problem arises, however, in a great variety of different forms, for many of which there is no easy answer. One can get some idea of the ambiguity about what right belongs in what bundle by reading a good case book on tort law. Tort law is what our libertarians from the Libertarian Party of India repeatedly come and talk about. Real-world law cases have included questions such as whether my building can block your sunlight, whether I am allowed to make an addition to my house that prevents your chimney from drawing properly, and whether a candy factory is allowed to produce vibrations in the ground that only become a problem when a neighboring physician builds a consulting room on his own property adjacent to the factory. The first step in dealing with such problems is to realize that the problem is not simply one person injuring another. If it were, we could prohibit the injury or charge damages. It is rather a case of two people engaged in inconsistent activities. My candy factory would be no problem if you had built your consulting room somewhere else on your lot. Your building your consulting room where you did would be no problem if I were not running a candy factory. This is a different way of saying that the relevant right in this case, the right to decide whether I can run machinery that produces vibrations on your land, seems to belong in two different bundles of rights, my ownership of my land and your ownership of yours. The second step is to realize that in many cases, it does not much matter how the initial bundles of rights are defined. At least from the standpoint of economic efficiency, if a right is valuable to two people and belongs to the one who values it less, his neighbor can always offer to buy it from him. If you have the right to order me to shut down my candy factory, I can offer instead to pay the cost of tearing down your consulting room and rebuilding it on the other side of the lot. If the right is more valuable to me than to you, I should be able to make some offer that you will accept. This insight leads us to the Coase theorem, named after Ronald Coase, an economist who was repeatedly cited in Dr. Kaushik Gangopadaya's first book, The Majoritarian Myth. Named after Ronald Coase, the economist whose ideas are largely responsible for this part of the chapter. The Coase theorem, C-O-A-S-E. The Coase theorem states that any initial definition of property rights will lead to an efficient outcome, provided that transaction costs are zero. The condition, which is zero transaction costs, is as important as the theorem. Suppose we start with a definition of property rights that forbids trespassing photons. Anyone may forbid me from making a light that he can see. The right to decide whether or not I turn on the lights in my house is worth more to me than to my neighbors. So in principle, I should be able to buy their permission. The problem is that there are a lot of people living within sight of my house. Buying permission from most of them does no good, since I need permission from all. The result is likely to be a difficult bargaining game with at least some of my neighbors trying to extort from me a sizable fraction of the value of my land in exchange for their permission to use it. This suggests that in deciding how property rights ought to be bundled, there are two important considerations. The first is that, so far as possible, rights should go in the bundle where they are most valuable. The right to control the air a foot over a piece of land is worth more to the owner than to anyone else. So ownership of land usually includes ownership of the space immediately above it. The second is that since the proper composition of bundles of rights will often be uncertain and may change over time, they should be defined in a way that makes it as easy as possible to trade rights. Property rights should be defined in a way that minimizes the transaction costs of likely transactions. And it is with these decentralized crowdfunding libertarian principles that we will bypass all the commies in the industry. One of the questions, property rights should be defined. So property rights should be defined in a way that minimizes the transaction costs of likely transactions. One of the questions to be decided is how to bundle the rights. Another and closely related question is what the rights are that we are bundling. Does my right to forbid intense lights and sounds from my property mean that I can forbid my neighbor from testing lasers and nuclear weapons and holding loud parties, or only that I can collect damages afterwards? The answer has been suggested in an earlier discussion, where transactions between the two parties are easily arranged, as in the case where only two neighbors are involved. There is much to be said for an absolute right to forbid backed up by punitive damages. That way, the court does not have to engage in the difficult task of measuring the cost to me of being blown up or kept awake. If what my neighbor wants to do is sufficiently important to him, he can offer to buy my permission or my land. But where transactions are impractical, a damage rule may be the best solution. Okay, hum damages de denge tumko. It is not practical to buy the right to emit unpleasant fumes from all of the 3,000 people who can occasionally smell what comes out of my smokestack. Even if it is worth much more to me to be able to run my factory than it is to them not to smell it, I will not be able to buy the permission of all of them. I face the same sort of bargaining problem as in the previous case of trespassing photons. One holdout can prevent the entire deal. Efficient legal rules might allocate the relevant right to my neighbors instead of to me, but make it a right to collect damages rather than a right to close down the factory. I believe I have now justified the title of this chapter. I have shown that economic analysis can answer questions about what the law ought to be that I cannot answer, that I believe cannot be answered, which is on the basis of libertarian principles. That claim must be qualified in several ways. I have shown what the law should be only in the sense in which an engineering textbook shows how a bridge should be built. That is how best way to look at the world. The mechanisms, the machinations. The engineering textbook shows how general physical principles can be applied to specific information, because they are Sanatan. This is true Sanatan economics, guys. Such as the strength of available materials and the width of the river to be bridged to figure out how to build a specific bridge. What can be more of a Sanatan principle than the fact that everything you consume, you see around you, is a scarce resource that needs efficient allocation, bro. वो है सनातन एक सच. उसके लिए एफिशिएंट एलोकेशन के लिए तुमको फ्री मार्केट चाहिए होगा, डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन चाहिए होगा, लिबर्टी चाहिए होगा, फ्रीडम चाहिए होगा. I have shown how economic principles can be applied to specific information, such as the value of one right to the owner of another, or the costs associated with arranging different sorts of transactions to figure out what legal rules maximize human happiness in a particular society. The engineering textbook shows how general physical principles can be applied to specific information, such as the strength of available materials and the width of the river to be bridged to figure out how to build a specific bridge. Economics is a newer field than engineering, and more is known about the strength of materials than about the cost of transactions. So the engineering textbook does its job better than I can do mine. Second qualification is to point out that point out that what I have given in this chapter is a very sketchy description of one part of a large field. A full analysis of what legal rules are implied by economic efficiency requires several volumes, not all of which have yet been written. Furthermore, the question of what rules are economically efficient is not the only question that the economic analysis of law deals with, merely the question that seems to me more relevant to this book. Much of the existing economics and law literature is devoted to the very different objectives of understanding why particular legal rules exist and what their consequences are. Most of the ideas I have been explaining were invented within the past 50 years. They are part of a field that is still being developed and much of which is still controversial. Readers who are interested in a much more detailed account of the economic analysis of law, including much of my own work in the field, will find it in my work called Law's Order. They may also find the next chapter of interest, which is called Private Law Enforcement, Medieval Iceland, and Libertarianism. Excuse me. And ancient India as well, I think. You'll find similarities there. It is based on one of my published articles and describes a society in which all laws, including the law against murder, were privately enforced, the Pashtuns of Afghanistan. Before ending the chapter, there is one final qualification to be made. Economic efficiency is only an approximate measure of total utility, and total utility is only a very partial description of what I think other people value. Even if we can prove that certain legal rules are economically efficient, it does not necessarily follow that we should be in favor of them. What I find interesting and useful about the economic analysis of law is not that it tells me for certain what the law should be, but that it starts with objectives based on what most of us want and apparently unrelated to questions of right and wrong, and ends with answers, conclusions about what the law should be, not all of which are obvious, because the world, remember, is beyond good and evil. So come out of this horseshit of this is a good thing to do, this is a bad thing to do. It's either useful or is it not, or it is not. So this was a very, very beautiful chapter. I think my favorite chapter in the book so far. Economic analysis of law, guys. You're done with most of the book. Let's see some comments. Suggest good ninja books. अरे कितना ही लिखा है उन्होंने, जो जो लिखा है सब पढ़ना पड़ेगा. Beyond Good and Evil, The Spoke, The Zarathustra, Genealogy of Models. ये तीन तो absolutely necessary है. Here to Learn is saying big section believe feminism just means equal respect for women, but feminist scriptures say otherwise. Should those who believe this be co-opted into dharmic feminism? They have already been co-opted. I don't think they should have been, but they have been. Like we ignored Ambedkar's problems on Hinduism. There are proud women who are propelling Sanatani feminism on Insta. That's not feminism. That's just a description of not random, specific women in the history of ancient India. That's not Sanatani. That's not feminism. That's not Sanatani feminism as well. That term just doesn't apply. It doesn't mean anything. Because feminism is a sort of a retribution, a sort of a revenge, or at least a correcting of a wrong. It's a justice. Okay, that injustice was happening, then feminism aya, then justice hua. If some dumb Hindus say that I am a Sanatani feminist or a Hindu feminist somehow, it means you are also agreeing with the basic premise of feminism. That yes, Hindu men around me were fucking assholes at one point. Not around me. Hindu male ancestors of mine were absolute assholes to female Hindu ancestors of mine. And you see here, these are the women who fought back, my ancestors, female ancestors who fought back against my male ancestors. यही अगर लौड़ा करना है तो सनातनी और प्रोटेस्टेंट और क्रिश्चियनिटी का क्या है? यही फेमिनिज्म है. And if you don't do that, if you go around just showing random great Indian women or Hindu women in our history, that's not feminism. That's just you pointing out some great women and me pointing out Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj or Savarkar. That's not nothing to do with feminism. Feminism means settling the justice, settling the injustice done by men on women. Are his books hard to understand? मेनली बैरियर होगा लैंग्वेज के लिए, सेंटेंस कंस्ट्रक्शन बहुत पिछले जमाने का है ना, थोड़ा प्रॉब्लम तो होगा ही भाई. They are the most dense and condensed information packed books written in the history of mankind. Most precise books that make you think. You read 2 sentences of Nietzsche, you can easily think for 2-3 hours. Like Jordan Peterson has one 45-minute video on just one paragraph of Beyond Good and Evil. Parbarika Didi is saying no one works properly if they have nothing to lose. Yes, for police you need the media politicians to hold them accountable. Politicians are not going to hold them accountable because it's the politicians who are making them become assholes. They are not becoming assholes on their own. For example, in Bengal, they have more to lose by working properly than looking away because of the hold of the party on people and the people's dependency on the party and the government. That's the source of the power. Source of power पे hit करना है, बाकी अपने आप ठीक हो जाएगा. Thanks a lot for this discussion, guys. Thank you for joining. See you soon. Bye bye. Good night.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো